Hello, everyone. We are back today talking about assessments and testing. And one of my favorite quotes regarding this topic is by the former NSCA president: use the minimum of testing to show the maximum results. There are so many new tools and gadgets today coming at us with technology rapidly advancing that it can get really easy to get caught up testing every single variable that you can test on an athlete. But at the end of the day, you're not going to have the time to actually run all of those tests or the time to sit there with all the data that you collected from those tests to actually make it worth it. So, when you're looking at what kind of tests you're going to implement, you have to be really realistic about what you need and what's going to show you the best results from that. All right, and then 4 reasons for testing: primarily to assess athletic talent, to identify the physical abilities in need of improvement, so any areas of weakness from that athlete, and then setting goals and tracking progress. One thing for the setting goals is that I would consider setting goals prior to testing, especially if you're working with a client and not an athlete, and that will help you determine what test to implement. But if you have athletes and you already have the test that you want to do based upon the biomechanical and metabolic needs, then from there you can set goals with your athletes or for your athletes. But I will tell you, if you set them for your athletes without having their buy-in and not setting them with them, you're not going to get what you want out of it as much as you could as if they were bought into it. There are several factors that influence our text selection that we need to pay attention to that you should already have outlined from your needs analysis. The metabolic energy system specificity. So this goes back to our needs analysis on which energy systems are specific to your sport from the demands of the sport. Then we have biomechanical movement specificity. This also goes back to our former discussion, looking at our biomechanical demands and what would actually apply and be beneficial for your athlete. If you have a football athlete and you are choosing a muscular strength or endurance test, a bench press would make more sense than a pull-up looking at the biomechanical demands for their sport, just like the pull-up would make more sense for the swimmer than a bench press. Experience and training status are going to have influence on the kinds of tests that you do here as well. Age and sex, and then environmental factors. So are you indoor testing? Are you outdoor testing? What does that look like? What time of year is it? All of those factors that you need to make sure that you standardize kind of go into environmental factors. All right, we are to testing order. If you are going to implement all 8 of these tests, it is important that you keep this specific order. If you're only going to use 4 of the tests, make sure those 4 are in their correct order, keeping in mind that you do not need to test every aspect if it does not pertain to the energetic or biomechanical demands of your sport. However, if you have time, it is good information to have, but not totally necessary. Also, if you have someone that's a client that's not specifically doing or competing in collegiate or professional level sports, then it would be a good idea to pull one from each category to make sure that you have a well-rounded approach for your fitness program. So here we're looking at the first is non-fatiguing, which it would make sense for that to go first because it's not going to affect our other tests that much. Anything like balance, flexibility, body composition. 2 is the agility. So agility, again, is neuromuscular demanding, so you need to be able to be quick, but it doesn't fatigue you so much that you can't be good at it if you did something else beforehand. So this is also not going to affect things that you do after it either. It can be kind of thrown into a warm-up. Max power, that is the most neurologically taxing, so you want to make sure to get a good number that you're not totally fatiguing yourself with tests 4 through 8 here. So anything like a max clean or a snatch. Vertical jump can be thrown in here too, even though it's technically less fatiguing. Number 4 is max strength. So that would be done after your power assessment, something like a max squat, deadlift, or bench. Then sprint is next. So sprints can be anything under 100 yards, and we'll talk more specifically about each of these in the slides to come. 6 is a local muscular endurance, so think push-up tests or YMCA bench press test. 7 is fatiguing anaerobic capacity tests. So remember, anaerobic energy systems operate with technically without oxygen, so it's the shorter, quick anaerobic fatiguing test, something like a suicide or a 300-yard shuttle. And then 8, aerobic capacity. This is something like your VO2 max, or if you do a 1.5 mile run. This is ideally done on a separate day. All right, now that you've picked out all of the assessments that you're going to implement with your clients or athletes, it's time to make sure that you standardize the entire testing day for your procedures, especially if you're going to retest, which of course you should, so you can see if the program that you're implementing is working for your athletes and it's the right dose and you get the right response. Now, some of these things you can't control, especially if it's an outdoor test. But if you can control it as much as possible, you need to make sure that your post-test is as identical to your pre-test. So something, for example, like temperature and humidity, those are going to be hard if you test your clients, especially here in Missouri, in August, and then you retest them again in October. The temperature and humidity is not going to be the same. So keep that in mind too if your results are a little different, that is going to have an effect on your athletes. All right, then the type of equipment. So if we're looking at type of equipment, let's say you do body composition for your athlete and you do skin folds the first time, and the second time you go and retest their body composition, you use a DEXA machine. That's not going to give you the same, that's comparing apples to pears or apples to oranges. It's not going to give you what you want it to, and it's not going to be good for you or your athlete mentally. So make sure you're using the exact same piece of equipment. Then the level of athlete fatigue. If you can, try to make sure that this is the same time of day for your athletes. Let's say in August, you get to test them Monday morning at 8 a.m. Ideally, in October or November, when you test them again, you're not testing them in the evening after they've already done practice and had a full day of classes. So that plays in here too. So make sure you write down everything and be specific on what you're doing. The same goes for nutrition. You can't control this, but if you can have your athletes write down what they eat before that first testing day and then save those and give that back to them before their second retest day, that way they can try to replicate that as much as possible. That's going to be very beneficial. Time of day, we mentioned that earlier with level of athlete fatigue. That's going to play in, especially hormonally. And then the warm-up should be exactly the same. So this one's on you. So write out exactly the warm-up that you have them do and then have them do that exact same warm-up for your retest day. All right, some examples of a non-fatiguing body composition: balance, stability, circumference measurements, flexibility like the sit and reach, and a good standard here for that minimum for an NSCA collegiate athlete. Males, we really want them to have an 18.5. If not, that's something they need to work on. And then females, 20 inches. So these are all examples of non-fatiguing. All right, here we have agility. So we have 2 tests. We've got the pro agility test, and more commonly used is the T-test. So if you look here in the bold, these are standardized numbers that you want to try and attain. So let's say you want your athlete to be well-rounded, and they have a 15-second T-test for male and an 18-second T-test for female. That's too slow, and you would see that agility is kind of a weak link for them, and you would want to work on that. Power assessments. It's a structural exercise that is performed very quickly and explosively, resulting in triple extension, which is extension of the ankles, the knees, and the hips. So broad jump, vertical jump, clean and jerk snatch, med ball throws. It's depending on what you're measuring power for. If I'm doing a broad jump, I want to know my horizontal power. My vertical jump is going to tell me my vertical power. So this is going to be really important for sports like basketball and volleyball. Muscular strength needs to be done for compound structural movements. So you wouldn't want to max out and see how much you can do a bicep curl with. That's not a good idea. That is going to probably land you in an injury or a torn bicep. Ideally, you're doing something like a deadlift or a back squat or a bench press. Speed, 10, 20, 40-yard dash is the most common. The standards for a 40-yard dash for males, less than 5 seconds. For females, less than 5.5. So if it's slower than that, that might be an area you need to work on. Local muscular endurance. The 2 most common tests for this are the YMCA bench press test, which is the metronome test till failure. You guys can see that in the link in your portal. And then push-up test is another upper body muscular endurance test. So one that is missing from the NSCA and the ACSM actually is a lower body muscular endurance test. There's no standards on that like there are for YMCA and then push-ups. Those are much more accepted than any lower body. So that is definitely a gap in the literature if you guys are looking for some type of a graduate dissertation topic. And then fatiguing anaerobic. So 300-yard shuttle, as mentioned earlier, basically it's 25-yard intervals and you go back and forth 12 times to equate to your 300 yards. You'd average the 2 trials and round to the nearest second for your time. Making sure you're resting 3 to 5 minutes between trials. Let's say on day 1 you do this and then you want to go do this in 4 or 8 weeks or however long you want to wait to see if your anaerobic capacity is increased. Make sure you know exactly how much time you rested, because if you give them 5 minutes on the first test and then the post test you give them 3 minutes, the recovery point's not going to be the same and it is going to skew your results. So a good time for males is less than 65 seconds and for females is less than 75 seconds. And then some aerobic capacity tests, the BEEP test, the VO2 max test if you have access to a metabolic cart. That is a very accurate assessment. And then 1 mile. So a lot of these tests have prediction calculations where you can go and estimate somebody's VO2 max from them. And this is the 8th of the test. So remember that NAMMSLFA, non-fatiguing, agility, max power, max strength, sprint, local muscular endurance, fatiguing anaerobic, and then aerobic capacity. And this one again is ideally done on a separate day if you are using this assessment for your athletes. If you don't find that it's necessary to do an aerobic capacity test for your specific sport, that's fine, then you don't need to do it. Just make sure that you can really justify not doing it.